The day began like any other, yet it would end in chaos that no one could have imagined. Amaka was having a casual video call with her friends, laughing at trivial jokes, when the calm was shattered by a deafening gunshot from the garden. Panic surged through her as she dropped her phone and ran outside, only to witness a scene that would haunt her forever. Her son Uchi holding his father's police pistol, white smoke curling from its barrel, while her daughter Chisholm lay sprawled on the grass, clutching her stomach in agony as blood seeped through her fingers. Screams tore from Amaka's throat as shock rooted her to the spot, and confusion clouded her mind. How could a simple game have escalated into such horror? Memories flooded back of the long years she and Ima had waited for children, enduring cruel whispers and accusations from friends and family who called her barren and cursed. Who advised Ima to take another wife? And yet, against all odds, she had finally conceived twins after a decade of longing, a miracle that had brought immense joy and the fleeting satisfaction of triumph over societal scorn. Ima, a high-ranking officer, had ensured Amaka was well cared for during her pregnancy, hiring first a beautiful young maid whose presence had sparked insecurity, and later the elderly widow Ifora, who, despite her tragic past, became a devoted caretaker to the twins and household. Amaka, however, became increasingly arrogant and indulgent after giving birth, over-pampering the twins, shielding them from correction, and treating Ifora with disdain, a behavior that had gradually taught the children to disrespect authority and disregard rules. On this fateful day, the consequences of those choices erupted violently. Uchi, inspired by the violent action movies he and Chisholm had been allowed to watch without guidance, decided to enact a police chase in the garden, unknowingly wielding a real gun. The bullets impact through the family into a maelstrom of fear, guilt, and urgency, and Amaka's first instinct was to retrieve the weapon, cover her children, and rush Chisholm to the hospital, racing against time as minutes felt like hours. The nurses whisked Chisholm into surgery, and Amaka volunteered to donate blood when the doctors realized EMAS was incompatible, a revelation that would later unravel hidden truths about parentage and fidelity, setting the stage for conflicts, revelations, and reconciliations that would challenge the very foundation of trust and love in their household. As the operation began and Amaka sat trembling, reflecting on years of overprotection, misguided indulgence, and the fragility of life, the horror of the moment crystallized into a painful lesson about responsibility, vigilance, and the unpredictable consequences of neglecting guidance for children, illustrating that even moments of joy and pride, when tainted by arrogance or inattention, could lead to devastating outcomes, forcing a family to confront secrets, mistakes, and the raw intensity of parental fear. Amaka's heart pounded as she clutched the steering wheel, racing to St. Joseph's Hospital with Chisholm barely conscious in the back seat, blood seeping through her tiny hands while her son Uchi trailed silently, frozen in shock, his young mind struggling to comprehend the gravity of what had just happened. The neighborhood had already gathered, whispering and pointing, but Amaka barely registered their presence, her focus entirely on saving her daughter. Upon arrival, the hospital staff sprang into action, whisking Chisholm into surgery, leaving Amaka trembling in the waiting area, replaying every moment that led to this nightmare, the overindulgence, the ignored warnings, the unmonitored movies, and the dangerous fascination the twins had developed with guns. Inspired by the media she had naively allowed into their lives, Emma's sudden call to Amaka's phone intensified the panic. He had been informed by neighbors about the gunshot and was furious, yet oblivious to the details. His sharp, commanding voice trembled with fear and anger as he demanded to know what had happened, forcing Amaka to stammer through the story while choking back tears. In the sterile hospital corridor, Amaka felt the weight of her failures, her neglect of guidance, the overprotection that had mutated into permissiveness, and the arrogance that had distanced Ephora from true authority over the twins, creating the chaos now threatening Chisholm's life. The doctor's urgent announcement that a blood transfusion was necessary revealed another shocking twist. Emma's blood was incompatible, a fact that unleashed confusion and suspicion. As the medical team suggested, Amaka's blood instead. Amid the blur of nurses and beeping machines, Amaka's mind raced, questioning her entire reality. Had her oversight not only endangered her child, but also uncovered truths about her family she had never anticipated? The twins, oblivious to the seriousness, yet sensing the tension, clung to her and whispered apologies, their small voices breaking through the haze of adrenaline and fear, reminding her of the innocent yet fragile nature of childhood. Memories of Emma's dedication and her own dependence on him surfaced, revealing the fragility of trust when confronted with life-or-death circumstances. She realized that her choices, born of love, pride, and fear, had consequences far beyond the immediate, rippling through every facet of her family's existence. Even Ephora, usually quiet and subservient, stepped forward with calm authority, coordinating with medical staff and providing reassurance, proving her enduring value and wisdom despite years of mistreatment. The realization that Amaka's arrogance had nearly destroyed the very lives she cherished forced a deep reckoning. Love alone was not enough, nor was wealth or privilege sufficient to shield children from the dangers of curiosity and imitation. As Chisholm underwent surgery, Amaka reflected on her years of indulgence, the lessons she had ignored, and the harsh, uncompromising realities of parental responsibility, promising silently to herself that if Chisholm survived, the family would be forever changed, with vigilance, respect, and boundaries at the forefront of their lives. It was in this crucible of fear, pain, and reflection that Amaka's character would begin a subtle transformation, learning humility, patience, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths, understanding for the first time that mistakes, however painful, could be the catalysts for genuine growth, healing, and the restoration of trust, both within herself and across the fractured dynamics of her household. While Chisholm was under the surgeon's care, Amaka sat rigid in the waiting room, her mind a whirlwind of guilt, fear, and frantic calculations, replaying every moment leading up to the accident, the way she had shielded the twins from discipline, how she had allowed them unrestricted access to movies filled with violence, and how her arrogance had often silenced Ephora's warnings, leaving her children dangerously uninformed about real-world consequences. Uchi sat beside her, his small hands trembling as he tried to process the trauma, guilt etched on his young face, while Amaka silently cursed herself for having allowed play and imitation to cross the boundary into life-threatening recklessness. The hospital's antiseptic air, punctuated by distant monitors and hurried footsteps, amplified her panic. As she realized that this incident was not only a near tragedy, but also a harsh indictment of her parenting choices, and that the privilege, love, and indulgence she had showered on her children could not substitute for guidance, vigilance, or respect for boundaries. Emma, meanwhile, arrived at the hospital, his usually composed demeanor replaced with a volatile mix of fury and fear, his eyes scanning the operating room and the waiting area, demanding answers with sharp, clipped questions that only intensified Amaka's anxiety. When she tried to explain, her voice quivered and fractured under the weight of her own mistakes, and Emma, blinded by the immediate trauma and the shocking revelation about blood incompatibility, could not yet reconcile the innocence of the twins with the deadly consequences of their actions. Ephora, standing quietly in the background, observed the unfolding drama with a mixture of sorrow and restrained authority, recognizing that the crisis was both a culmination of years of negligence and an opportunity for reflection, as her own tragic past lent her a perspective Amaka lacked, allowing her to calmly organize information for the doctors, comfort the children, and support Amaka in navigating the unbearable tension of the moment. Amid the chaos, Amaka's thoughts drifted to the years she had spent relishing the miracle of twins, after a decade-long struggle with infertility, and how the very joy she had once celebrated had transformed into reckless indulgence, as she consistently overruled EMA's attempts at discipline, dismissed Ephora's advice, and allowed the children to become addicted to media that glorified violence, all of which had directly contributed to this near-fatal accident. As she watched the surgeons work tirelessly, the metallic scent of the hospital and the sterile clatter of instruments heightened her awareness of the fragility of life, and she silently vowed that should Chisholm survive, this family would undergo a profound transformation in discipline, respect, and mutual accountability. The incident became a crucible of awareness, forcing Amaka to confront not only the external danger posed by weapons and imitation, but also the internal failures of her own parenting, pride, and lack of foresight. And as the minutes stretched into an eternity, the shared fear of mother, father, and caregiver forged a tense but unspoken bond, a recognition that love alone was insufficient, that boundaries, instruction, and moral guidance were essential to prevent catastrophe, and that humility, vigilance, and careful attention to the children's influences would be the only path forward if they were to survive this trial intact, both physically and emotionally. The hours dragged on like an eternity as Amaka sat beside the hospital bed, staring blankly at the sterile white walls, her mind a chaotic swirl of fear, guilt, and desperate prayers. Replaying over and over the moment Uchi had picked up his father's pistol and the horrifying bang that had sent Chisholm collapsing to the ground. The blood on the grass and the cries of her children etched permanently into her memory. She reflected bitterly on how her overindulgence and arrogance had eroded the authority of Ephora, who, despite being a wise and experienced caregiver, had been consistently dismissed and insulted, leaving the children without proper guidance and discipline. And now all that neglect had culminated in a nearly fatal accident that threatened to destroy everything Amaka had worked so hard to protect. Ima arrived shortly after, his face a mask of anger and concern, his hands trembling slightly as he took in the scene, the blood transfusion revelation still fresh in his mind, shaking his faith in the family he thought he knew so well, and forcing Amaka to confront the consequences of her behavior, not only as a mother, but also as a wife. Realizing that her failure to supervise and instill discipline had put both children's lives in immediate danger and shattered the trust and peace that had existed in their household for so many years. In the midst of this, Ifora quietly supported Amaka, guiding her through the hospital's procedures, providing emotional support, and observing the unfolding tension with a clarity born from her own life's tragedies, as she had lost her husband and children in a fire years earlier. A loss that had taught her the impermanence of life and the critical importance of responsibility and moral guidance in raising children, lessons that Amaka had tragically ignored. Uchi, sitting quietly on a chair beside his mother, kept whispering apologies, his young voice filled with guilt, unable to understand fully the magnitude of what had happened, but feeling the weight of blame for injuring his sister, while Chisholm, unconscious on the operating table, relied entirely on the hands of strangers to save her, a terrifying reminder of the fragility of life and the dire consequences of carelessness and disobedience. As the surgical team worked tirelessly, Amaka's mind revisited every stage of the twins' upbringing, the unmonitored media consumption, the constant indulgence, the overprotection that had become permissiveness, and the subtle arrogance that had taught them to disrespect Ifora and ignore authority of which had directly contributed to the incident, forcing her to confront the stark reality that love, without discipline, guidance, and boundaries, could be destructive rather than protective. Aimee, wrestling with a confusing blend of fury, fear, and lingering doubts about the children's parentage, paced the hallway, muttering questions under his breath and glancing occasionally at Amaka, who sat frozen, tears streaming down her face as she silently acknowledged her failures and prayed for forgiveness not just from her husband, but from life itself, for allowing the combination of negligence and indulgence to create such a perilous situation. By the time Chisholm's surgery concluded and she was stabilized, the atmosphere was thick with relief, sorrow, and reflection, and Amaka knew that their family would never be the same. Respect for caregivers, clear boundaries, careful supervision of influences, and humility in parenting were no longer optional, and the near tragedy had forged a painful yet essential awakening, a lesson etched into her heart that would guide every action she took with her children from that moment forward. After the initial panic of Chisholm's accident had subsided and she was stabilized in the hospital, the family was forced to confront not only the physical danger the twins had been exposed to, but also the deeper truths and hidden tensions that had silently guided their lives for years. As Amaka reflected on how her overprotectiveness had warped into overindulgence, how she had dismissed Ifora's guidance, and how her own arrogance had inadvertently taught Uchi and Chisholm that rules could be ignored with impunity, resulting in behavior that had nearly ended in tragedy. Ima, though relieved to see his children alive, was visibly shaken and filled with a storm of conflicting emotions: anger at the recklessness, fear for the lives of his children, confusion over the revelation that his blood did not match Chisholm's, and a dawning suspicion that the truths he had long taken for granted about parentage and trust might be far more complicated than he had imagined. Ephora, standing quietly but resolutely, gently reminded everyone that the incident was both a warning and a lesson, sharing her experience of loss and survival after the fire that had claimed her family, and emphasizing the crucial importance of careful supervision, moral guidance, and the recognition that innocence, if left unchecked, could become dangerously naive. A lesson Amaka was forced to internalize as she saw the fear and guilt in Uchi's eyes and the frail yet recovering form of Chisholm on the bed. The hospital corridors were filled with quiet whispers and the occasional hurried footstep. Yet, within the room, time seemed suspended as Amaka and Ima grappled with the emotional fallout, recalling the decade of struggle that had led to the twins' miraculous birth, the ridicule and scorn she had endured for years as a woman unable to conceive, and the complex dynamics of power, love, and loyalty that had always been part of their household. Amaka realized that her past choices, her indulgence, arrogance, and unwillingness to allow any authority to guide her children had culminated in a moment of near catastrophe that left no room for denial or excuse. Ima, still attempting to process the revelations about the twins' blood, paced restlessly while Amaka sat beside him, trembling, her mind racing to find the right words to explain what had truly happened, knowing that any misstep could shatter the fragile reconciliation they needed to maintain trust and stability within the family, and feeling the full weight of responsibility for both the accident and the lessons that must now be enforced to prevent recurrence. In this charged atmosphere, Uchi approached his mother, his young voice barely above a whisper, apologizing for what he had done, and despite the anger and fear still bubbling beneath the surface, forgave him, recognizing that punishment alone would not instill wisdom, and that guidance, discipline, and structured boundaries were now essential. The near-death experience became a turning point, compelling Amaka to reassess her approach, Ima to confront uncomfortable truths about parentage, and Ephora to act as a moral anchor, ensuring that the lessons of responsibility, accountability, and vigilance were instilled without resentment. The hospital experience, filled with tension, revelation, and reconciliation, forced every member of the household to confront the consequences of negligence and the fragility of trust, teaching them that love, if untempered by guidance, could lead to peril, and that humility, courage, and honest communication were the only tools that could ensure the safety and unity of the family, marking the beginning of a profound transformation in their relationships and perspectives. As Chisholm slowly regained consciousness and the blood transfusion stabilized her condition, Amaka felt a mixture of relief, lingering guilt, and a sharp awareness of how dangerously close they had come to losing her child, while Uchi hovered timidly beside her, his small hands nervously clutching the hem of his shirt, eyes wide with remorse, and though still processing the shock of the blood incompatibility and the unresolved questions about parentage, remained firmly by their side, his presence both a reassurance and a silent admonishment, reminding Amaka of the consequences of her indulgent parenting and the imperative to correct her mistakes before tragedy could strike again. Ephora, ever vigilant, took on the quiet task of ensuring the twins were calm, explaining to them gently why what they had done was dangerous, and instilling in them a sense of accountability without invoking fear, proving her invaluable role as a stabilizing force in the household that Amaka had so often undervalued. The hospital room, though bright with fluorescent lighting, felt heavy with emotion as Amaka contemplated the years of her own choices, the overprotection that had morphed into permissiveness, the arrogance that had dismissed advice and marginalized Ephora's authority, and the indulgence that had allowed the children to mimic unsafe behaviors seen in movies and media. All of these factors had converged into a moment that could have ended in irreversible loss, forcing Amaka to confront her parenting failures with unflinching honesty. EMA, pacing near the bed, spoke sharply but measuredly, outlining the responsibilities that now rested on Amaka's shoulders, emphasizing that love without guidance and discipline could not protect the children, and reminding her that vigilance, moral boundaries, and active supervision were essential not only for safety but for the development of character and respect in the twins. Lessons that the near-fatal accident had brutally highlighted. Uchi, overwhelmed by guilt, whispered apologies repeatedly, while Chisholm, still weak but conscious, offered a fragile smile, signaling forgiveness and the innocence of a child's heart even in the aftermath of trauma, prompting Amaka to tearfully vow to herself that this would be the last time negligence endangered their lives. Ephora, recognizing the gravity of the situation, stepped forward and outlined strategies for monitoring the twins' activities, controlling media exposure, and re-establishing discipline within the household. Her experience as both a survivor of personal tragedy and a wise caretaker providing the perspective and structure that Amaka had so often resisted. For the first time, Amaka truly listened, internalizing the lessons and acknowledging that authority, wisdom, and guidance were not threats to her maternal role, but essential partners in raising responsible, safe, and morally conscious children. As the day turned to evening, the family collectively absorbed the weight, each member silently contemplating the fragility of life, the consequences of poor judgment, and the importance of trust, communication, and shared responsibility, while Amaka, humbled and introspective, finally understood that her past indulgence had placed her family in peril, that EMA's vigilance and Ephora's wisdom were invaluable, and that the twins' behavior could no longer be shaped by leniency and favoritism, but by a balance of love, structure, and moral guidance, ensuring that such a disaster would never be repeated. The experience, though harrowing, became a turning point for the family, laying the foundation for renewed respect, accountability, and awareness, and teaching Amaka that true parental love requires courage, humility, and the discipline to guide children safely through a world filled with dangers, both real and unseen. After the crisis in the hospital, Amaka returned home with a renewed sense of humility and responsibility, her heart heavy with the lessons she had learned about the dangerous consequences of negligence, indulgence, and unchecked authority. While Uchi and Chisholm, though physically recovering, still carried the psychological weight of their near-death experience, glancing nervously at the surroundings and the adults who had saved them, uncertain of the boundaries that would now define their lives. MIA, equally shaken but resolute, insisted on immediate changes in the household, emphasizing that the balance between love, discipline and respect had to be restored, and that Ephora's wisdom must be followed without question, as her guidance had proven essential in averting a tragedy that could have destroyed their entire family. From the moment they stepped back into their home, Amika observed how her previous arrogance had created a distorted hierarchy in which her children had been permitted to disrespect authority, ignore rules, and indulge in reckless behavior, a pattern that required urgent correction, and she vowed to recalibrate her parenting approach, taking full responsibility for teaching respect, obedience, and accountability, while ensuring that love and warmth were not sacrificed in the process. Uchi, still haunted by the incident, clung to his mother's hand, whispering apologies, and Chisholm, delicate yet strong, nodded in quiet understanding, signaling that the children had internalized the gravity of their actions, even if their innocence had led them astray. While Ima and Ephora coordinated efforts to restructure the household, limiting exposure to violent or inappropriate media, supervising playtime more carefully, and reinforcing consequences for dangerous behavior, all within an environment that fostered safety, moral awareness, and emotional growth. Amika, reflecting on her past indulgence, recognized how her desire to overcompensate for years of barrenness had led to favoritism, leniency, and ultimately the erosion of authority and discipline in the home. She realized that true parental love demanded courage, consistency, and humility, and that without these, even the most devoted care could result in harm, as the near-fatal accident had painfully demonstrated. Ephora, drawing upon her experience of personal loss and resilience, quietly guided Amika and Ima through the process of rebuilding the household's moral framework, instructing them on how to set clear expectations, enforce rules without cruelty, and cultivate respect for authority in the twins, while simultaneously nurturing empathy, critical thinking, and personal responsibility, an approach that Amika had resisted in the past but now embraced fully, recognizing its vital importance. The twins themselves, though young, began to sense the shift in atmosphere, noting the seriousness with which their parents now approached discipline and safety, and gradually internalized the lessons about boundaries, the dangers of imitation, and the responsibilities that accompanied freedom, learning firsthand that actions have consequences, and that trust and respect are earned, not assumed. Over the following weeks, the household transformed. Television and movie time were carefully monitored. Dangerous objects were secured, and a culture of accountability replaced the previous chaos, while Amika's own attitude shifted from arrogance and entitlement to humility and reflection, allowing her to rebuild a trusting, safe environment for her children. EMA support and Ephora's guidance ensured that these lessons were implemented consistently, demonstrating that even in the aftermath of a family could emerge stronger, wiser, and more cohesive, united by a shared understanding of responsibility, safety, and love, and committed to never repeating the mistakes of the past. In the days following the hospital ordeal, the household settled into a new rhythm defined by vigilance, respect, and structured love. As Amika fully embraced the lessons of humility and accountability, understanding that indulgence without guidance had nearly destroyed the family she had once thought untouchable, while Ima, still processing the shock of the near tragedy and the revelations about parentage, dedicated himself to rebuilding trust and ensuring that clear boundaries were maintained. Working closely with Ephora to monitor the twins' behavior and guide them toward responsible decision-making, instilling values that combined firmness with compassion. The twins, Uchi and Chisholm, slowly internalized the gravity of their actions, recognizing that their playful imitation of adult scenarios had nearly led to irreversible consequences, and began responding to rules and instructions with attentiveness and respect. A remarkable shift that reflected the cumulative influence of parental guidance, caregiver wisdom, and the profound impact of experiencing both fear and forgiveness in a safe environment. Amaka, reflecting on the decade-long journey of longing, ridicule, and eventual joy in motherhood, realized that the true measure of love was not in indulgence or protection from all hardship, but in teaching children the difference between right and wrong, safety and recklessness, and respect and entitlement. A lesson painfully reinforced by Chisholm's brush with death and Uchi's trembling remorse. She committed herself to a balanced approach, nurturing curiosity, moral awareness, and empathy while setting firm limits, ensuring that the twins would grow up with both confidence and humility, aware of their responsibilities and the consequences of their actions. Ima, reconciling with the complicated truths about the twins' birth and the hidden betrayals that had once threatened to tear the family apart, chose to focus on the present, fostering communication, understanding, and unity, while honoring Ephora's counsel, which had proven instrumental in guiding the family through crises and modeling for the twins the importance of courage, honesty, and trust, lessons that transcended fear and punishment, demonstrating that discipline, paired with love, cultivated true safety and moral development. Over time, the home transformed into a haven of stability and learning, where media consumption was carefully monitored, conflicts were resolved through dialogue, and the authority of caregivers was respected. As the twins absorbed the structure and predictability that had previously been absent, recognizing that rules were not obstacles but shields, protecting them from harm and teaching them accountability, empathy, and critical thinking, Amaka's relationship with Ephora shifted from dismissal to respect and appreciation, acknowledging the invaluable role the elderly caregiver had played in safeguarding her children and restoring harmony, while EMA's guidance balanced firmness with warmth, reinforcing that parental love requires vigilance, consistency, and moral clarity. As months passed, the family's experiences became a source of reflection, personal growth, and deepened bonds. With Amaka embracing humility, Aime exercising patience, and the twins learning to navigate the world with awareness and prudence, guided by the wisdom of Ephora and the loving authority of their parents, creating a household where safety, moral integrity, and emotional growth were intertwined. The near tragedy, though harrowing, had forged resilience, gratitude, and understanding, ensuring that the lessons of oversight, respect, and responsibility would remain etched in their hearts, a foundation for a lifetime of trust, care, and secure family relationships, proving that even the darkest moments could give rise to enlightenment, transformation, and enduring love.